Hey guys, Michael here. Today I'm going to share with you how to engrave on this tumbler using this P2 and the RA2 Pro. Stick with me, let's get to it. So this is the tumbler we're going to be engraving today. I'm going to be engraving the top half of this tumbler. The first thing I need to do before I do that is take off the handle and remove the lid. This is a duplicate Stanley tumbler. It is not an official Stanley tumbler. However, this has the exact same dimensions. So let me get this handle off of here. You can get that off by unscrewing those two little screws. And let me do so now. So each tumbler, I think, or the duplicates have different type screws. This one uses Phillips screws. Now this one's kind of at a weird angle. Just put the screwdriver in there one way or the other so you can get flat against the screw there and remove it. Okay, with the screws out, I can take this handle off, and you'll see there are a couple of metal tabs in there that we're holding the handle on there. With these metal tabs, you'll need to bend them out of the way because the laser head's going to get pretty close to this, and it'll actually hit these tabs on the P2. So what we're going to do is just bend them out of the way. There's a couple ways you can do that. You can do that with a pair of pliers, or you can do that with a like a screwdriver or something small, stick it in the hole, and you can bend it over. I choose to use a pair of needle nose pliers, and what I'll do is just grab it like this, and I'll bend it gently over, like that. Just like that. Now, as long as you don't do this too many times, you should not break the tabs. Just be careful when you do that. So before I chuck this up into the RA2 Pro, I need to make a couple of measurements. I need to measure how tall I want my engraving to be, and then how far around what the perimeter is of this. And the perimeter is needed for two reasons. One is to make my design fit, and two, to put it in XCS and tell XCS how fast to turn this when it's actually rotating. So with the ruler included with the RA2 Pro, I'm going to wrap it around here, and I'm going to measure this. So when you measure it, keep in mind this is in centimeters, and most of the time you're working in millimeters in XCS, so you'll need to move the decimal place one over to the right after you get the measurement. So in this case, I am measuring, it looks like 31.6. So if it's 31.6, I want to enter 316 for the perimeter. Let me write that down real quick before I forget. Let me double check, make sure it's right. Okay, 316. Now, next thing I need to do is measure how wide do I want this engraving, and I want it to be a little bit down from where the paint ends and a little bit up from where that curved part is. So I'm just going to use this ruler here, get pretty close, and we're looking at 13. So 13 centimeters, and add a 0 to that, remove the decimal place one over to the right, so that'll be 130. So I'm going to write that down as well. So now let's take this tumbler and chuck it up into the RA2 Pro. Alright, so I have the RA2 Pro and I have my tumbler. What I'm going to do is put these legs in here beyond the threaded part of the tumbler right there. So I want the flats here to be on the flats inside this tumbler. So what I'm going to do is push this a little bit beyond those threads. With holding that in place, I'm going to start rotating this jaw and expand this jaw to grab the inside of it. And I'll tell you what, no matter what I do, I always rotate it the wrong way the first time. So there we go. Got it going the right direction now. As you're getting close and it's starting to get snug against this, just kind of wiggle the tumbler around as you move it with your hand and try to get it nice and square on there. With it hand tight, you'll want to rotate this tumbler. And what you're going to do is look for a wobble on the back side. If it is rotating up and down, you'll want to wiggle this a little bit to make that adjustment until you stop the wobble completely. Once you do so, and it's actually in a good position, you can then take your chuck key and tighten up the chuck so that it doesn't go anywhere. Now when you're tightening this up with the chuck key, don't make it too tight. These are plastic components. You don't want to break it. You don't want to bend them. You just want to actually get it where it's nice and snug and firm against here. What I want to do next is make sure the back end is supported, because over time this will actually sag and it may start wiggling or wobbling as you're engraving. So I'm going to use this tool here and slide it underneath the tail position, and you're going to spin it until it barely kisses the middle of that tumbler. And with that in place, again, double check and make sure it doesn't lift off of this and it stays flat. Yeah, that looks good like that. So normally you would do this inside the P2. I'm doing it out here to make it easier to see. So what we're going to do is now put this inside the P2 and check it again and make sure it's nice and flat. So to set up your P2 before you put your tumbler in there, you'll want to take out the base plate or the crumb tray, and you'll pull it out, flip it over, and find the right location that will match up to fit your tumbler. What I normally do is pull it out and guess. Basically, I'm guessing to where I think it will be, and I'll double check that here in a second. I'm going to put it on, in this case, looks like number 3. Make sure this is in both locations at both sides, and you can take your tumbler and put it down in there. Once you get it in there, you need to double check the height and compare that to the height of where the slats would be if they were installed. An easy way to do that is take one slat and lay it down on top of the frames and put it up against the tumbler. Here I can see my tumbler is way too high and I need to lower it down. So I'm going to take this crumb tray out and drop it down a level and try it again. Okay, so now I just moved it down, and you can see the top of this is really close to the bottom of the slat. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want it pretty close. That allows the P2 to automatically adjust and engrave on your tumbler properly. I have my RA2 Pro locked in. I've double checked my tumbler, rotating it around. I have my tabs bent over, and I have my RA2 Pro plugged into my P2. The next thing I need to do is make sure this is square with the gantry and double check to see if this tumbler is level with the gantry. You need to make sure this is level with your laser, and the only way to do that is if you check your bubble against your gantry first, then check your level against your tumbler. With these two in place, now I can turn on the P2 and move this directly underneath the laser. So I'm not sure how well you can see this. I think it's pretty washed out, but what I'm going to do is there's a laser touching the top of this tumbler barrel. However, it is not at the highest point. So what I need to do is remove the RA2 Pro and the tailpiece until the laser is directly at the highest point of this tumbler. Now that that's in place, I need to make sure, is this tumbler square with this P2? The easiest way I found to do that is take a spare piece of acrylic or 3mm plywood. This has the factory edges on here because I know these are all 90 degrees. I'm going to use this as my template. I'm going to slide this in from the bottom with the door open. I'm going to push this against the side of the riser base. Holding this against the side of the riser base, I can now push it against the RA2 Pro and adjust the RA2 Pro. Once I do that, now I know this RA2 Pro is in line perfectly with the laser. So now that everything's set up inside the P2, I know that it is perpendicular or parallel to the laser. I know that it has the right height and the laser is actually touching the top highest point of that tumbler. I can move on over to XCS and we can start working on a design to set this up and start engraving our tumbler. Here we are in XCS. I've started it up. It's connected automatically to the P2 and it has refreshed what's on the screen. Over here on the right hand side, I'm going to change it from slats flat to laser cylindrical. On the mode, because I'm using the chuck on the RA2 Pro, I'm going to select chuck. Inside the parameter box, I measured the parameter at 316, so I'm going to type that in there. The distance, what we're going to do is use the auto measure feature. Because I have the laser on the highest point of the tumbler, I'm just going to press this button and let it auto measure on the laser, on the tumbler itself. Now that I have everything set up on the right hand side, the next thing I need to do is insert the image into my working area here. So I'm going to select image, browse your computer and find the image you want to insert. If the image is too large, it's going to let you know here in the next second. You have the option to choose. Do you want the software to scale it down to fit, or do you want it to keep the original size? I'm going to keep the original size and I'm going to scale it down myself. So as you can see, this image is rather large, so I'm going to zoom out using my control key and my mouse wheel, rolling it down. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is rotate this and set up this object so that it actually matches my tumbler. I'm going to select the image. Because the top of my tumbler is on the bottom, I want to rotate this around 180 degrees. Alright, so the next thing to do is change the height, the width and height of this image to match my tumbler. Now, if you recall, my tumbler is 130 millimeters high. So what I'm going to do is adjust how high it is, matching 130. Now that I have that, I can zoom in holding the control key and the mouse wheel, grab the image again, move it over here. Alright, so we are at 130 high. Now I need to match the perimeter of my tumbler. I measured 316. This one is actually set up to 130, which is what I want, by 176. I need to adjust the 176 and not adjust the 130. To do so, I'm going to unlock the padlock. Now I'm going to adjust this to 316. That is going to match the exact size of my tumbler. Now I actually want this a little bit skinnier, so I'm going to change this from 130 to a 125 just to make it fit, and I'm going to leave the 316 alone. Now when we did the auto measure over here off to the right to get the distance, what it did was it moved this line automatically to the highest point of this tumbler. This is where the laser is going to do all the engraving. This is where it's going to start. However, looking at this screen, it looks distorted because the cameras don't really see exactly looking straight down on top of the piece. Even if I use the close or the capture close view camera, it doesn't look quite the same. Let me show you what that looks like. If I come over here and I'm going to get on top of this tumbler. And I'm going to zoom in using my control key and my mouse wheel. As you can see, this line is nowhere near the top of this tumbler. That's okay. Ignore what you see on the screen. Just trust the software and trust that this line is at the top of this tumbler. Now what you can do with that close view camera is actually utilize to find this location on top of the tumbler as far as how far down in the screen this image needs to go, but then use the line to know how far left it needs to go. So here's what I'm going to do. Click on the image and I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to zoom in using that camera. I want the engraving to be about that far away from the edge of the paint or the finish on there. And then zoom out, trust the line, and move this object to the left of the line, or sorry, to the right of the line. And you can use your arrow keys and hold down shift and it jumps a little bit faster. And keep everything just to the right of the line. So again, you cannot use the camera to line up your object inside the P2. It just doesn't work. However, a trick I found was you can, however, use the camera to get the vertical on your tumbler to get it up and down this way. Just again, trust the line to know that this is actually the top of the tumbler, not way over here to the right hand side as you see visually on this screen. And then what I can do is actually use a close-up capture and capture the bottom to see how far off my image is going to be from the curve of that tumbler. I can zoom in and I can see that there is a pretty big gap between the top of this curve and this line right here. So what I'm going to do is maybe shift this down a little bit more using the arrow keys. Kind of center that in there. Okay, so now I am ready to go. I have my image set up. It's set up as far as the width goes, matching the perimeter, which is 316. And then I have the height as high as I want it to go. I have it right to the right of this line. So now that I have everything set up, the last thing I need to do is set up the speed and power and lines per centimeter based on my tests. I'm going to enter what I think will work best for this tumbler. Now it's up to you on whatever your preference is. However, in this case, I'm going to use 60% power, 200 millimeters per second, 200 lines per centimeter, and I'm going to leave the rest of it alone. There are quite a few steps, as you can see, but once you start doing this, it kind of becomes second nature. It takes a little bit of practice, right? So there are some big key things, or some key things you need to focus on. Is number one, did you have the right height of the tumbler? Is the tumbler level to the gantry? Is it straight to the gantry? And I use that trick with that piece of wood in there to make sure it's straight. Now on the software side, you need to make sure it's set up properly. Do you have the right distance? Do you have the perimeter typed in properly based on what you measured? Do you have the image set up? Do you have your speed? Do you have your power, your lines per centimeter, the engraving mode? Do you also have the size of your object? Does it match everything? So once you go all through the check boxes, you can start engraving, and that's the scary part. So you always want to test this on a tested tumbler. Don't make this I only have one tumbler to try this on and hopefully I get it right. Get some dupes, you know, make some tests. So I'm going to test this out on this dupe and see if this works. Okay, so now that all that is finished, I'm ready to go, right? Not quite yet, because this has tabs on there and I auto measured to the top of the tumbler, not to the top of the tabs. The tabs are actually going to get hit by the laser head. So to get around that, you really need to measure to the top of the tabs. So what I did was I just kind of made it a little bit easier and just did the auto measure against the tumbler, set up all the software, set up all the alignment, everything's ready to go. I'm just going to go back in and auto measure or manually measure how far those at the top of the tab to the laser head. Now you can use two different methods. Now xTool originally gave us this little guy here. This was the original manual ruler, where it does a mechanical ruler. You have to slide this up and down until it hits the material, and then you read right here on the top. And I think they've changed that recently to where you get a ruler that looks like this. I made it out of clear acrylic, where this is similar to the M1, and you just hold it down till you hit the top of the material and read what does it show against the laser head. Now both of these reference different points of the laser head, that's why they are so far off. However, I need to measure this to the top of the tab. So there's a couple ways I can do that. Number one, I can leave it powered on, and I can use in XCS the software to drive this around using laser path and drive it on top until I get it on top of the laser head. I don't like doing it that way just because it's kind of clunky and I have to go back and forth to my computer. So instead what I do is I just turn off my P2. With it powered off, you can actually move the laser head around by hand. And with it powered on, you cannot, because all the servo motors are actually engaged and they won't let you move it by hand. So with it by hand, or with it turned off, I can rotate my tumbler with the tab up, move the laser head on top, and take my ruler, and I'm just going to measure to see what the distance is. In this case, the distance I measured with the ruler is 15 millimeters. Whereas when I did it before in XCS using the auto measure, it was 19 millimeters. That difference is probably enough where the laser head would have hit the tabs if I started it off the way it is now. So with that measurement known, I'm going to hop in XCS, override the 19 to 15, hit send, and let's process our engraving. Okay, this is all finished up. This took an hour and 3 minutes to engrave. Let me pull the tumbler off the RA2 Pro. Alright, so here's what the product looks like, and this is not finished. Now I need to clean this off because we're burning paint, so I need to wipe the burnt paint and the soot off. You can use a couple of products on here to clean this. I prefer to use isopropyl alcohol, but you can also use other products such as LA Awesome, or there's some other products that people use. However, I keep a bottle of isopropyl alcohol around. I'm going to spray on this, and I'm going to use a magic eraser to rub this off. And let me just spray it real quick. Okay, once I finish that with the sponge, I'll give it one more spray and use a microfiber cloth to give it a good wipe down here. And if you can see that now, but that looks much better now. So the last thing I need to do is bend the tabs back and put the handles back on my tumbler. That's about right. Take my handle, slide it back on there, and carefully use a screwdriver and screw the screws back into place. So everything's been cleaned and the handle's reattached, and there is the final tumbler there. So that's all I want to share with you. Hopefully you found this video helpful. I'll see you next time.